Remember when the former US president said he wanted to buy Greenland? Yeah, it sounded like a really bizarre headline, right? But what if it wasn't just some strange, off the cuff remark? What if it was actually a signal of a massive geopolitical shift, one that's happening right now in one of the most remote places on Earth? Steve, the core of the argument was never really about a real estate deal. It was all about national security. The line was that Denmark, which governs Greenland, just couldn't defend it from big players like Russia or China, and that only the US was in a position to step in and protect it. So, which is it? Was this just another unpredictable statement that we should all just forget? Or was there something else going on? Well, experts in global strategy saw something totally different. They saw what could be a deep, calculated logic behind the whole idea. To really understand that logic, we have to rewind the clock a bit. Because, this American interest in Greenland, it isn't new at all. It actually starts with a pretty critical secret from the dawn of the nuclear age. Okay, so picture this. It's the Cold War. American military planners figure out something absolutely terrifying. The shortest way for Soviet bombers to hit North America is to fly right over the North Pole. All of a sudden, Greenland isn't this remote, icy outpost anymore. It's the front line. So a defense agreement gets signed with Denmark in '51, and by 1953, Thule Air Base is up and running as this critical early warning system. And honestly, that Cold War thinking never really went away. So that history explains the why, but it doesn't explain the why now. I mean, what's changed so dramatically that the US would go from just running a base there to wanting to buy the entire island? Well, the answer lies in one of the biggest environmental transformations happening on our planet. As the Arctic ice melts, the whole map of the region is basically being redrawn. What used to be a frozen, impenetrable barrier, kind of like a giant wall, is now becoming an open ocean. And this space, which looks so empty and peaceful, is suddenly turning into one of the most contested places in the world. Today, Greenland sits at the intersection of, well, pretty much everything that matters in 21st century power games. Yeah, it's still about missile defense for sure, but it's also about watching space, tracking satellites, and keeping communications secure. And on top of all that, the melting ice is opening up brand new shipping routes and uncovering these vast, untapped troves of strategic minerals. And let's get specific on the military side for a second. Greenland is the anchor for this critical naval choke point called the GIUK Gap. The easiest way to think of it is like the Strait of Hormuz, but for the Arctic. Any Russian sub that wants to get from its northern bases out into the open Atlantic Ocean has to pass through this narrow corridor. So, if you control Greenland, you essentially control, or at the very least, you can watch, that vital passageway. So who are the main players in this new great game? It's not just the United States, not by a long shot. Two other global powers have their own big plans for the Arctic, and yeah, their goals are putting them in direct competition. When you break it down, you can see everyone's got their own agenda. For the US, it's all about homeland security, missile defense and keeping tabs on those submarine routes. Then you've got Russia, which is pouring money into remilitarizing its Arctic coast. For them, it's about protecting their nuclear subs and opening up new shipping lanes. And then there's China. Now, China has no Arctic territory, but it calls itself a near-Arctic state. They're pushing this Polar Silk Road idea, using huge investments in things like mining and research to get a strategic foothold in the region. But here's where the story takes a really unexpected turn. This isn't just a simple story of East versus West. The most surprising part of this whole thing isn't the rivalry with Russia or China. The real drama, the big twist in our story, is happening inside the Western alliance itself. The push for Greenland basically poked an old, deep wound for Europe. It brought this old fear roaring back to life. Not that the US would do something illegal, but that it would just go off and do its own thing, for its own reasons, without even talking to its allies. And look, this isn't just paranoia, it's grounded in history. You go back to the Suez Crisis in 1956, the US pretty much forced the British and French to back down to protect its own interests. Or, more recently, the 2003 Iraq War, which Washington pushed ahead with even though Europe was deeply divided. There's a clear track record of the US going it alone when it wants to. And this really gets to the heart of the problem. After World War II, Europe basically built its entire security system, NATO, around US protection. It made sense. It let them focus on rebuilding their economies. But now, that dependence is a huge vulnerability. Whether we're talking about missile defense, space surveillance, or Arctic security, Europe still relies heavily on the US, and Greenland just put that uncomfortable truth right out there for everyone to see. So the verdict is pretty clear. Greenland is no longer just some quiet, background piece of infrastructure for Western defense. It has become an open battlefield for resources, for influence, and for strategic advantage. And this is maybe the most startling conclusion of all. While the US, Russia, and China are all jockeying for position, the most immediate fallout from the whole Greenland affair is actually the tension within the Western alliance. The fight for control over the Arctic's future has ended up pitting the United States against its oldest friends. Which leaves us with a really critical question for the future. For over 70 years, you had the Arctic ice acting as a physical barrier, and you had the solidarity of the West acting as a geopolitical one. But now, as that ice is literally disappearing before our eyes, we have to wonder, are the foundations of those old alliances proving to be just as fragile?